Welcome, everyone, and happy Thursday. It is noon Eastern time here in Ambler, Pennsylvania, the booming metropolis just outside of Philadelphia. And Thursdays, noon Eastern time, you know what that means. It is time for Talent Experience Live, your weekly look into all things recruiting, talent acquisition, talent management, skills, artificial intelligence, human resource as a whole, and so much more. And if you're familiar with this program, you've certainly heard this before, but Talent Experience Live is proudly brought to you by the good folks here at Phenom, whose purpose is to help 1 billion find the right work. That is why we host this video podcast on a weekly basis, why we have another fantastic podcast with Cliff Yerkowitz called Unusual Attitudes, which comes out Mondays on a monthly basis, why we have a slew of fantastic webinars, why we have AI Day coming up in the month of September, why we'll be at every single HR event under the sun, and so much more. Of course, if any of this interests you at all, don't walk to phenom.com to learn more, where you'll also learn about our applied artificial intelligence. But before you do that, of course, we have to go over how we help a billion find the right work. That is through our Intelligent Talent Experience platform, which helps candidates find the right fit faster, employees evolve in their current positions and beyond. Recruiters achieve next level efficiency and productivity, and managers, of course, get to build better teams through data analytics and automation. All of this is applied through artificial intelligence and machine learning. So as I mentioned before, it can all be found at phenom.com. If you're so inclined, hit the request a demo button to learn more. But before you do that, we have a fantastic episode for you today. It is a part of our 3-part series where we teamed up with some folks from Deloitte to chat about the hot topics. And today is the first iteration of that, the first edition. John Deal and Bhawna Bist, who is who is Director of Human Capital at Deloitte Consulting LLP, and John Deal, who of course is our Senior Director here at Phenom of Product Marketing. And they sat down to chat about AI and talent acquisition, simply beyond automation. So their conversation's fantastic. I had the advantage of sitting down and listening to it a little bit earlier, but they really get nitty gritty. Bhawna, of course, is a wealth of knowledge. She is a recurring guest to the program, so we were very fortunate to have us here. And they talked about some of the trends, some of where things are going, where they expect them to be, and what's truly changed. So without any further hesitation, here is Bhawna Bist and John Deal chatting a little bit about artificial intelligence. Thanks so much.
So thank you so much, Bhawna, for joining me today. I'm excited to talk to you. Where are you calling in from?
From Princeton, New Jersey.
Okay, not too far from Ambler, Pennsylvania, where I am sitting right now, and not too far from where I grew up, actually. I didn't move far so that my parents would be close to their grandkids, which I was told was a requirement. So
it's a wonderful requirement, yes.
So Bhawna, please introduce yourself first, because you are the guest of honor, and give us a little bit of background on what you do for Deloitte.
Absolutely. Great to be here again. My name is Bhawna Bist. I'm a managing director in Deloitte's human capital practice, and I'm the national leader for our talent acquisition transformation advisory. So the work I do is serving our clients across industries in transforming the talent acquisition function. So really thinking through the buy side of talent for our clients through strategy, through experience design, processes, technology enablement. And it's a fascinating space to problem solve and design with our clients every day. So I've been at Deloitte in the TA transformation space for about 10 years now. And in my prior life, I was in the industry. So I started in HR, in talent acquisition, took many global roles, led the TA function. So the first 10 years of my career has been in service of the function before I moved to advisory. So I'm very, very passionate about talent acquisition and the transformation in this space.
Yeah, so needless to say, you're speaking from experience when you talk about what are the things that are ripe for transformation. And can you tell us a little bit about your part in the Deloitte TA Tech Trends report?
Absolutely. So I lead our talent acquisition technology trends study. This is the 8th year of our study. And what we really try to solve through this is understanding how talent acquisition technology landscape is shifting, what are the advancements we are seeing, what are the new vendors, new technology, new use cases that are being solved for. And that's the marketplace perspective. But then we also have a point of view on what are the TA technology challenges our clients are working through. What are the problems they're trying to solve? What are the risks they're trying to mitigate? So we do a lot of work with defining the transformation that is enabled through technology. So we bring that client lens and then think through this holistically from the key trends which we see emerging from the vendor marketplace perspective, but also where there may be most interest from our clients.
Okay, cool. And so, as part of these engagements and some of the insights that you've put together, you've bucketed things into 4 primary trends or key trends as part of the report. And can you give me just a quick overview of those trends, and then we can dive a little bit deeper?
Absolutely. So this year's report, we are highlighting 4 key trends in TA technology. The first one, no surprise, is around AI and agent-powered recruiting. And this trend really looks at the advancement we are seeing in agentic TA mostly. We've seen AI for TA being available in the market for a while now. But what's the next level of agent-powered recruiting solutions that are emerging? Again, we categorize them as AI assisted, augmented, or part solutions. But there's a huge amount of, I would say, interest from our clients to understand the space, as well as a lot of advancement from the vendor marketplace around how these solutions are coming to life. The second trend is around talent intelligence driven sourcing. And this is really getting very precise in the sourcing side, which is a considerable lift for talent acquisition because there's significant time spent on sourcing. There is less and less success sometimes in finding passive candidates who are a fit. And so we are seeing taking a lot of, I would say, insights and data, competition intelligence, regional talent availability to really coming through technology to enable a much more targeted sourcing strategy. So that's a second trend we are seeing. The third one is around interview intelligence and optimization, which is looking at bringing advanced technologies and AI to help with that interview phase of the process. And this may be around transcribing interviews, scheduling, analyzing and comparing interview notes and providing synthesis for decision making, fraud detection, etc. So that's the third trend. And the last one is around the evolution of the technology stack, which essentially is how companies are thinking through the strategy for how the TS tech stack would be put together and configured, and looking at multiple options, bringing in talent intelligence layers, or even agentic solution on that text evolution of what TA technologies would be pieced together to deliver the TA experience and outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously at Phenom are very passionate about talent intelligence and about AI and agent-powered recruiting. We did launch at our conference earlier this year, 25 new agents that are rolling out throughout the year. And I mean, some of the more popular ones from the conversations I've had are some of the ones that related to screening. Like we have a voice agent that has been a lot of people have been interested in, mostly in high volume situations where it's overwhelming to have to do thousands of phone calls and try to get through all of those. But that historically is really what companies have been doing. And they've tried various screening tools along the way, and the voice agent, the sophistication of the LLMs and the voice agent capabilities now is leaps and bounds above what we've had in the past with like voice prompts, and trying to go off script was not a thing that could be accomplished previously. It was like, nope, please press 0 to speak to a representative, right? So but what are some of the more popular applications, or some of the more asked about agents that you're hearing in your conversations with your clients?
Yeah. Again, great question, and very much we answer every day for our clients. And I think what we're realizing is, there are certainly certain areas of TA which are becoming more great place to do a pilot or get started with, which we see our clients kind of honing in on to start with the agentic journey. I would say sourcing is one of them, where you are thinking of how can we reduce the burden on sourcing. If you have full cycle recruiters, they do not have time to source, or there's a lot of spend around agencies for sourcing candidate. So again, I would say from a risk perspective also, you're talking about mostly passive candidates. So it's about outreach, looking at data, finding talent pools which may have previously not being handled manually, right, from a search perspective. So there's a huge amount of interest in sourcing agents, I would say, because it does provide a lot of operational efficiencies. And also it's kind of a lesser risk as you compare to further along in the cycle, when you start talking about decision making, candidate experience, or human in the loop, etc. So it's almost can we augment recruiters or augment our sources, and look at agentic to look at front end of the processes. The other example I can say is the interview scheduling. Again, I think all of us know how painful interview scheduling is. It's a lot of manual effort still. There has been a lot of advancement in technology for scheduling, but I don't see any client saying, I've fixed my interview scheduling completely and I'm very happy with the outcomes. There's still a lot of friction in the process. So that's another space where we see agentic interest being very high. And then there are some clients and conversations where we are pushing the needle and the clients are like, let's think much more transformative, where we start thinking about agents which are kind of working alongside a recruiter and kind of augmenting much more of their work. So I would say there are certain areas where we see and very, I would say, interest in getting started with. And then there's some complex areas where there's still a lot of decision making, making sure there's a balanced approach, risk is being mitigated as the strategy is being put together.
Yeah, and risk mitigation is a good segue into, the question around to fully automate or to not fully automate, right? To go autonomous or not to go autonomous. And so you talked a little bit about augmentation. So what guidance are you given these teams as you start to talk about the actual execution of rollout?
Yeah. I would say, there are certain things which we need to balance as we're thinking about a future state which is sustainable, in which you have the humans, all agents, the automation available to deliver the work. And the way we look at is, yes, there's productivity gains. There is a lens of risk. There's a lens of experience. And then there's a lens of technology, right? Because I think technology is providing you a lot of advancements and what was not capable in the past, but now that is possible. There's been a lot of hype as well, I must say, in terms of how much we are hearing in terms of completely autonomous functions, no human in the loop, etc. But when we're having these conversations, they're very, very real to kind of understand the different lenses and looking through the entire journey for talent acquisition and making assessments where we have friction points, where traditionally we have not solved the problem of the work itself. And that is really requiring a lot of manual work. You'll be surprised, Evan, to, when we are doing assessments with our clients, and we discover how much manual, repeatable work still exists. And the recruiters and the teams are not happy about it. That's not how they want to spend the day. So really thinking through maybe those low-hanging fruits, and then having a very balanced point of view in terms of what makes sense to assist, augment, and automate. And that can, I would say, vary across the client based on, their maturity, their risk appetite, and also their the willingness to adopt new things. So I think that becomes a spectrum. But again, I think having those lenses and thinking through each step in the TA journey becomes a very critical conversation to define the use cases, prioritize use case, and then get started with your agentic journey.
Yeah, and hand in hand with that one of the things that we've kind of been talking to customers about, and is really, I think, incumbent on every technology vendor, is how can you build that level of trust with these tools? And it's not something that's new to agents. It's something that's been around with AI for a while, right? Even simple things like matching algorithms. How can you trust that the algorithms aren't perpetuating bias in the process? And right, and now with agents, it's how can you trust that you can wind them up and let them go, and that they'll raise their hand, their virtual hand, when they need a human to come into the loop. So it's certainly not a new story, but it's just a story that keeps getting more and more complicated as the technology gets more and more able to handle a lot of things autonomously. So,
yeah. I would say, the way we are approaching this conversation is almost like it's not that the work is going away if you're bringing an agent, it's being done differently. And you need to think about an agent as your digital worker. So to your point, in terms of what's the performance, how are we measuring the outcomes and the decisions of the hiring, which may be supported in part or autonomously by agents. And then how are we training the data set to making sure that you're getting the outcomes what is expected. So I think it is so much of responsibility, I think, which comes as a TA function. And those are the areas where we see the shift in where TA needs to spend time. Can we use technology, but then manage and make the technology work with the outcomes we wanted to deliver? That's a new set of work and skill sets the TA team have not in the past had to that muscle was not required in order to deliver. But I think that shift is, I see that with many of our mature clients having and asking those questions and almost thinking of agents as augmentation to the team and, around how do we make sure we have the right outputs from the agents.
Yeah, and you kind of hit on the next thing I was going to go into, which is that change in the way that the TA teams are going to execute work, and that they're becoming much more stewards of the technology, and making sure that the technology is going to work in the way that they intended to work. So what does that mean from a skill set perspective for recruiters in the future?
This is such a great and a cool question, because we do feel like as recruiting shifts, the scope of what recruiting does will change, as well as what's needed for the future roles within recruiting will also shift. So we did a study with one of our clients where we were doing workshop with them and trying to really understand how is the work divided today versus based on their strategy for more augmentation and thinking about agents, how would that shift? So interestingly, we saw in today's kind of scenario, they were spending about 40% of the time in sourcing, about 30% time in screening and interview, 20% in more admin work, but about 10% only in strategic work, which required insights or governance. But if you look at the future state based on where they wanted to go, 70% of the work would be in planning, insight, governance, decision making. And most of the task, admin, screening, sourcing would be significantly reduced. So it was almost flipping off the pyramid, as you see. for the work itself. So what does it mean for the recruiter? And I'll just take the example of like translation of the role, the work itself, and therefore the roles and skill. So for recruiter role, very less time in sourcing, scheduling, administration tasks, but more time in engaging with the hiring manager, really understanding what's the rubric for a successful hire, because you can deploy technology to find candidates, but you have to define and validate that. So I think that becomes a very key portion of really having an understanding of what makes a good hire. There's more around data and insight, which channels to engage, how to engage, so that you get the right outcome, cost management. So there's a lot of like shift. If you really think about the role is more moving from maybe an operational focus to a strategic focus, and really being what we've been always saying, TA recruiters need to be advisors, right? But we really shift, but that was not possible because there was a lot of operational work that had to be executed. So you would not have that time to really be strategic and understand the business, translate requirements, and be having a governance role in the work. But that's evolving as well, and that's reflecting in the future, I would say, job description of recruiters as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, it hopefully excites the recruiting audience and the TA audience to be more strategic and have a more hands-on role in refining the rubric that you talked about, and really getting fine-tuned on what is the right candidate for every given role. So but speaking about that shift and the 40% of time being spent on sourcing, you kind of touched on agents for sourcing, but one of your second trend was really talent intelligence for sourcing, and the availability of a much broader set of data and a much broader set of tools to that sourcing function. And so talk to us a little bit about how that larger data set, that more connected data set, and that insights from that talent intelligence solution is driving sourcing to be more proactive than reactive in the process.
Absolutely. I've seen like now with most of our clients, they have some kind of talent intelligence, either layer built in or solution which provides them decision making or insights, which are based on AI technologies. So the availability of data is much, much higher now, where you have information on sources of candidates, the skill sets which got hired. But the value in translating this data to really bringing it up the funnel is what we see the real, I would say, the impact is, where you are targeted sourcing candidates from untapped markets, untapped or secondary skills, which may be not your primary skills, but through your talent intelligence, you've been able to find secondary skills which were relatable to the work, especially difficult to find skills, and using that data to analyze the sources and defining sourcing strategy is, I would say, the big shift which technology is enabling. Also because proactive recruiting, especially like even now when we speak with our clients, finding the right candidate is still very hard. They have a challenge of a lot of candidates applying, a volume is high, but still finding the right candidate is hard. So how can we bring that intelligence and data and insight to inform labor markets, which you may have to look into? We're also seeing a lot of competitor insights where you're looking at demand and supply of a particular skill set, looking at companies and sources where you're hiring from versus where your employees are leaving to. So attrition and hiring analysis, which is all becoming a very critical part of the sourcing strategy.
Okay. And have you, you talked about skills and the shift to being more skills focused. And I guess I have a bias been on about 14 TXLs talking about skills. But from your perspective, what are the advantages of using kind of that AI-driven skills approach to talent mapping and to leveraging it in sourcing?
Yeah. So my perspective on skills and skills hiring is it's very helpful and advantageous for the TA function. Because if you look at the data which is really available for you to define jobs, to source, to assess, it's all anchored on skills. In absence of that common language understanding and definition, it becomes very arbitrary for the TA function to perform the different tasks, which leads to a hire, right? So it's, to me, skills is the data where TA is very reliant on. And that really becomes, and that's being embedded in technologies from talent intelligence to assessment, etc. So I think there's a lot of merit in that. I think where we find the struggle is the skills definition. TA normally doesn't own skills in an organization, right? So how do we make sure, so absolutely TA becomes a customer of the skills, and it's very important to embed it in the part of the work. It definitely is very beneficial, but I think the ownership on skills definition and that sometimes that influence, and we challenge that, should TA be more engaged in skills definition and skills technologies, because it's a critical part for TA to embed and a lot of TA technologies have skills as the foundation. So I think that's the one challenge. And then I would say, in terms of can we, sometimes I see the TA teams taking advantage of AI, where you don't need a big architecture for skills, but skills can be inferred or detected. And those strategies I've seen working well for our clients, where TA is a little bit more nimble and using technology to aid skills-based hiring. So I think that's been what we've seen with our clients. Again, it's interesting because of the ownership sometimes, but I think, I don't see any other data point as strong as skills right now to inform end-to-end hiring.
Yeah, and I think it does help because it's a common language that's used on the hiring side and on the employee side, right? So, but much like you have the description of a role internally and the description of a job for hiring, I think that you need flexibility in how skills are going to be defined to support the internal development needs, but also support the hiring needs. So, so for all the folks listening in on this, absolutely include TA in the process of defining skills and how they're going to be used in the organization, because that just helps proliferate the usage up and down the talent lifecycle. So so it's absolutely a great point. So thank you for that. And starting with skills up front in the sourcing process then leads us into the screening and then the interview process. And assessing skills in the interview process is a complicated endeavor, of course, right? Like you said, finding the right candidate is hard. Even when you have a resume and they've answered screening questions and they've done an assessment and they've filled out all the necessary paperwork, now you're on the video with them, and it's time to ask the right questions to make sure that everything is going to align with the answers they've given previously and with what the job requires. So enter interview intelligence, right? And talk a little bit about what you have seen from the tools that are being brought to bear to help aid in the assessment of candidates in live interviews.
No, this is the third trend which we have, interview intelligence. And again, the reason it's so highlighted is, to your point, that's where you're making decisions on the hire. I would say still a lot of interview strategy and process is defined at a hiring manager level, where you're really asking the hiring manager to decide, and they have a very valid input in terms of what the role is and what they're expecting from the role, what kind of skills and experience is needed for the role. However, it's, the anchor is the insights at a hiring manager level, and that can be a broad spectrum of the kind of inputs you really receive in order to then and that point is usually an intake meeting with the hiring manager where you're making these decisions. But with the advancement of technology, with skills architecture, with a lot of intelligence that is coming through the vendors and technology solutions in this space, I think this becomes such a critical part and a big focus area in our client conversation as well. How do we make sure the technology or input we are providing is resulting in the right decision, that you are selecting the right candidate and deselecting the candidates which are not the best fit for the role? So the insights here really start to augment the process of assessment, which may be, if I look at scheduling or interview note synthesis, et cetera, which is much more the work itself, but then insights which you can look at the data or the feedback across different candidates. Maybe it's through panel and maybe comparing the candidates against different criterias of the assessment rubrics and kind of giving data back for decision making to a panel or a hiring manager, so that they're not basing decision on recall, but really things which are assessed and which were really determined as criteria for the role. So really bringing back that insight and data and presenting it to the decision makers to make much more informed decisions. Because at the end of the day, you've spent so much effort and dollars in terms of getting to that point, but how can we augment that point of decision making so that you have a better fit candidate who's offered? And I must say, when we assess or have interviews with hiring managers, they really are fitting and recruiting in a part of their business day. So sometimes they do not have all the insights of all the candidates they have interviewed in the past. Such assistance is really, really helpful for them to recall and have these insights to make decisions on the hire. So those kind of augmentations, I think, will become much more important, especially if you think about even agentic, right? If you're looking at recruiters and a lot of agentic work being done for recruiting, then at the point of decision making, do you have the right augmentation insights to make the decision, which will be the human in the loop there?
Yeah, it's a great step forward to have that kind of information hub, right? Where you don't have to necessarily depend on, like you said, your recall, and you don't have to necessarily depend on the debrief meeting to get to, sharing of information. That you can accelerate your understanding of everybody's insights from an interview perspective, and everybody's kind of, reading from the same Bible as well, right? So everything's centralized. The other thing that we have been hearing about, and I'd love to get your perspective on, is not only the use of interview intelligence to assess whether a candidate is a good fit, but also using similar tools to determine if a candidate is actually who they say they are, and if they're given authentic answers during the process, or if they're actually in Ohio and not on the other side of the world. Like these types of risks, which vary from simply reading from ChatGPT all the way to potentially hiring a different person that you actually interviewed. What I'm assuming it's come up for you too. So can you share a little bit about the conversations you've been having?
I would say absolutely. I think it's all over the news with some recent cases, as well as deep fakes is some of the conversations we're getting in with our clients, especially from a risk mitigation perspective. So as I initially said, the amount of risk on hiring with AI is increasing. One is managing the tools, but also the behavior of the candidates and who's showing up for interviews. Is there fraud in hiring? Are there deep fakes? We've seen news articles around deep fakes being hired, right? And most of our clients are kind of asking the question, what should we do to get ahead of it? So interestingly, we just had a conversation today morning, and this was a conversation we had with our HR technology team. I was involved from a talent acquisition advisory and strategy perspective and a cyber practice. And it was around really looking at deep fakes, which may be occurring in different parts of businesses, but how do, when they show up in the TA cycle, what kind of solutions should be there to detect? And how can you look at identity verification upfront? I think it's not even fraud now. It's is it a human or non-human? So I think that space with the risk we are seeing will evolve. I think there'll be more and more solutions and checks and balances. We already see some checks and balances within TA technology itself, be it assessment technology, be it onboarding, where some risk mitigation is happening. But I think this is a partnership opportunity where we look outside of even talent acquisition technologies to look at these risks which are emerging. And therefore, I think the boundaries of TA and IT and cyber teams within organization is also blurring, because those use cases for deep fake is emerging in different parts of HR processes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I was at a family event this weekend. I was explaining exactly this process that's going on to my parents, and they were like, "This,
Yeah.
what's up? What's wrong with this world?"
Right?
Right. So, how do you fake it? Like
Yeah.
they never did a video interview, so it was
Yeah.
them showing up. But
Yeah.
but you talked a little bit about, solutions outside of the traditional, the TA tech stack. And, of course, one of your trends is that evolution of that tech stack. So can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing as far as the direction people are going to, integrate additional solutions, how the agentic framework kind of integrates into this conversational AI assistance? Like, what does that evolution look like as we talk about these trends and the impact on that overall tech stack?
Absolutely. I think we all now, with our conversation and trends, know how much is shifting in TA technology and the risks and the opportunities that exist. So it definitely has an impact on what your traditional TA technology stack used to look like. And we call it a stack because you have to just, I would say, stitch together a solution of technologies which help you right through the end-to-end cycle for talent acquisition. So that to us stays, but I think the evolution here is really about who are the players which are influencing the stack. Traditionally, it's been a functional decision and maybe an HRIT decision, where you have the TA teams really defining what the requirements are and what kind of solutions or point solution or AI platforms or core technologies need to be brought together. But the influence set or decision makers, I feel, has broadened certainly, especially as we go into agentic, where a lot of agentic mandates are driven outside of even HR for I would say TA. It may be from the IT or CTO mandate, which is looking across business for agentic opportunities. So I think there's certainly that context which has changed. And if an organization is going with, say, a build or buy decision for agentic, for example, it may shift in terms of how you're bringing agentic automation as an organization, right? We saw the same thing for Gen AI as well, where some of the Gen AI was built, but it wasn't for TA, it was for the entire organization, and TA use cases were included in it. So I think that's one evolution. But then also, I would say, I see a lot of strategic thought being given by the TA teams to even think about the potential opportunities. I'll give you an example. I think 5 years ago, if we had a conversation with a client who's thinking about the applicant tracking system, not happy with it, we need to replace an ATS, and the replacement was another ATS, right? One point solution to another. That was the direction, and looking at vendor selection for that. But now the way you can put together a stack is very different. You can you can have strategies where you look at the engagement layers actually doing most of the work for TA, where your reliance on applicant tracking system is minimal, right? Or you can think about, for high volume, you can think about very conversational AI-based technologies. So just thinking through what makes most sense for your type of hiring, what are the broader decisions for HR, TA, and IT, and then looking at optionalities of that stack is where we see the evolution. Yeah.
Okay. Of course, working for Phenom, we appreciate the idea of continuing to build out your engagement layer and and conversational AI for high volume is certainly definitely a compelling use case. And we've talked a little bit about the four trends and agents, talent intelligence for sourcing, interview intelligence to help hiring managers and recruiters, and what it all means from a tech stack perspective. So, from your work with some of the early adopters, from your conversations you've had with people that are AI forward or a little bit more on the bleeding edge, what are one or two points of advice that you have for the rest of the folks who are still kind of trying to digest everything and understand all the options and want to move forward but aren't quite sure maybe what are the gotchas or the landmines they had to, right? So
Yeah.
give us one or two nuggets.
I would say the biggest insight I would have is like expand your knowledge set. And again, there's so much evolving so fast. It's very hard to kind of be very sure about, and I know everything about a space, right? Because there's new technology advancements coming in. There are new use cases. Sometimes there's a lot of hype. You see extreme, I would say, cases in the news. So I think it is about absorbing what's the insights are there available on technologies to be more knowledgeable. We're always happy to connect with our clients. Most of the conversations we start with our clients are about just tell us what's going on in the TA space, and we are hearing a lot, but help us just synthesize what's important, what's real, what's not real. And again, not everybody, to your point, like is in the journey of bleeding edge. Most of the conversations we're having is like, how do I get started? What are low-hanging fruits for me in the TA side? How can I increase productivity, have my TA team be less burnt out using technology? And then, yes, there are certain clients who are in their fifth or sixth cycle of AI adoption, and they are very, I would say, savvy in piloting and experimenting and willing to fail sometimes in a safe way. So that's extreme. But I would say a lot of our clients, so I would not feel hesitant in asking or having a conversation to just get more informed. And that can be through advisors, external advisors, that can be through vendor partners like Phenom. I'm sure you get engaged in a lot of conversation where you're sharing your perspective as well with clients. It can be with your risk team. It can be with your cyber team. It can be with teams which are building agentic solutions outside of TA and HR as well within your organization. So I think the more insights you have certainly prepares, and also not having, I would say, a mindset that we haven't adopted AI so far, so we are behind, or this, how should we get started? I think a lot of the conversation we have is like that initial openness to start using technology in a safe way. So I would say there is pros and cons of late starters as well, because what is available to you now might have not been available, and you can really redefine your stack, strategy, experience in using the latest which is out there. So again, I think that would be my 2 cents there. But it's an exciting time for talent acquisition, and where I feel the most amount of disruption happening through technology, it's opening the aperture for really redefining talent acquisition, really understanding what is the work, what success looks like, and how do we bring technology and our teams together to deliver the right outcomes. So it's really taking the conversation back to the drawing board and saying, if we decouple everything and just look at the opportunity of the work and the output, then what's the best way to structure the work, and therefore leading into the technology enablement.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. So you've heard the trends, everybody who's listening in, and of course, there's a much more detailed report around all of these trends. So if you're interested in that detail, I can point to the bottom of the screen and task our video team with putting a link there to where the report lives. Bhavna, I thank you so much for joining today and for talking to us about a topic I like, because I'm digging the whole agentic possibilities, right? And what it's going to do. And like you said, it's a time of huge disruption, and maybe the biggest for TA since the phone was invented. So so looking forward to learning more about these trends as we dive into the report, and also looking forward to seeing you on a future TXL, because it was a great conversation, and I appreciate your insights, and I'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you for having me. Great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Bhavna and John. It was a pleasure getting to have you on the program yet again. John, I think, has been on at least 50 times at this point. It should be TXL featuring John Deal, but nonetheless, he is always a wealth of knowledge, knows all things skills inside and out, and it was nice to hear his conversation with Bhavna. Next week, we are continuing the conversation with Deloitte. We have part 2 of kind of our Deloitte Phenom crossover, if you will. And our guest is Brandon Kennedy, who's also a part of the Deloitte Consulting wing. I sat down with him and we were able to chat specifically about the candidate experience. We talked a little bit about the state of candidate experience, some of the priorities that were gathered from that, but overall, just an outstanding look at candidate experience, how it's changed, and where it is headed in the future. So Brandon, of course, another Deloitte member, a wealth of knowledge. And then next week, we also have another Deloitte episode where I sit down with Susan Cantrell, and we talk about redefining work with AI. Deloitte simply recently released a 2025 human capital trends report. So we dive into that. You don't want to miss any of the episodes. If you missed any of the episode today, it is on demand right now on YouTube, or of course, you can always head to Spotify or Apple Music to listen to it if that is more your speed. But in the meantime, I look forward to seeing you next week with my conversation with Brandon, and can't wait to see you the week after that as well. Have a safe, happy, and healthy weekend, and we will see you soon.